Prologue. Go tell it on the mountain. Watch yourself, son. It changes dead quick round here, so it does, shouts the rugged dog walker. I can just about hear him over the gusting wind. Change and quick are not words I associate with my beloved city. I've spent most of my life having to watch myself for wanting this place to change too fast. In 1998, nationalist and unionist politicians agreed to share power in Northern Ireland. But today, their voters still aren't sure if they want to live together. My hopes for past hurts healed and a city at ease with its different peoples are still not a reality. My dreams of Catholics and Protestants and people of all faiths living together in shared streets and our children learning together in the same schools have not come true. But then, I always was a bit of a dreamer. That wee lad's head's in cloud cuckoo land, my mother would say, fretting as she watched me grow up, hoping for peace with our Catholic neighbours across the peace wall in West Belfast. She knew very well that things did not change very quickly. Thanks, I'm going for a hike up to the Black Mountain Ridge, I replied to the walker as if I were Sir Edmund Hillary. But in truth, I have little of the requisite skill, muscle or mountaineering equipment. For my ascent of Divis Mountain, I'm wearing an old pair of jeans, prehistoric trainers, a faded Doctor Who 50th anniversary t-shirt, and an inappropriately youthful hoodie, which at least prevents the wind from puncturing my eardrums. Are you sure you'll be all right, mate? Calls the dog walker. Them there clouds over the moorns is going nowhere, so they're not. I assume he's a fellow West Belfast man, about the same age as me, but as the entrance to the Divis Mountain Park is closer to the nationalist area, he's probably from the other side of the sectarian divide. As if that matters. In 50 years' time, we'll both be on the other side. In 1,000 years, if archaeologists dig up our bones, they won't identify us as Irish or British, just human remains. My compatriot looks like he's had a tougher life than me, and as he tugs on his pit bull terrier's leash, I wonder what experiences have carved those deep grooves in his tanned forehead. In any case, I accept his superior meteorological knowledge as I haven't been up here in 30 years. It's early summer, and apart from a few clouds threatening in the distance, the sky is lighter and bluer than I could have imagined. Due to a lifelong problem of trying to cram too much into my diary, I have exactly 90 minutes to reach the summit, or I'll be late for a recording of a television interview with another Belfast writer. At nearly 1,600 feet, Divis Mountain is the highest and darkest of our hills over Belfast. It's a wild and barren place, breathing down the neck of the vast housing estates of West Belfast. I'm certain most of the residents have never been up here, even though it's their mountain, and the need to claim ownership of land is visceral for the people of Belfast. 70 years ago, thousands of families, including my father's, climbed up these fields to escape the Belfast Blitz. Of course, I cannot help but recall the dirty war that broke out in the streets below in 1969, when I was only 6 years old. I grew up at the top of the Shankill Road in one of the new 1960s housing estates that crept up the mountain. Our red brick homes encroached on the green fields lush with gorse and heather that slope upwards steeply to mountain-top moorland. When I was a child, we called this adventure zone Up the Fields. All summer long, we climbed over bushes, marshy shucks and fields covered in cow's clap, picking blackberries and catching newts in streams en route to the summit. It was a hard climb for a wee lad to reach the mountaintop, past angry farmers, irritable bulls and suspicious soldiers. Even back then, you had to watch yourself round here. It's a good indication of how Belfast has risen from the ashes of 35 years of conflict, that this mountain, once controlled by the British Army as a strategic vantage point overlooking hostile territory, now belongs to the National Trust and has a proper car park, picnic tables and a visitor centre. The last time I was up here, there were keep out signs and helicopters and soldiers. Today, there are signs for scenic nature trails and a restored barn with a cappuccino machine and a disabled toilet. Apparently, there was flora, fauna and archaeology up here all along. Today I was able to drive here, and I should be able to hike to the summit in less than an hour and get back into the city centre in good time for my television recording. Both the beauty and the wind blow me away. The scenery is more weathered Celtic than pristine Alpine. I can imagine hordes of orcs from the Lord of the Rings marauding over this moorland rather than Julie Andrews and an ensemble of Von Trapps doing do-re-mi. As I climb, there are few trees, but I come across a hawthorn bush, no doubt saved for fear of the fairies, standing out all alone like a Belfast pacifist. It's an uncharacteristically sunny day, but the wind is strong and persistent, and it bends the mountain reeds around me to 45 degrees. I stop at several streams, hopping over a shuck to retrieve a shining sharp flint stone, wanting to believe this was once the arrowhead of a Neolithic hunter. The mighty Divis transmitter still dominates the landscape, like a base station on some lesser planet. As I gather pace, I stumble across another sign, a rusting steel give way signal, inexplicably flapping in the wind at a junction of two mountain paths. Maybe I should detach the sign from this post and carry it down the mountain like a latter-day Presbyterian Moses. We could do worse than give way to one another a wee bit more in Belfast. As I press on against the resistant winds, a spectacular vista begins to unfold. Now I am standing adjacent to the Cave Hill, and across Belfast Lough I can see the more modest Hollywood Hills. Nowadays Belfast is competing with their Californian namesake for international feature film production. They used to shoot people and dump their bodies on this mountain, but today this is a place renowned for a different sort of shooting. The view from the summit is breathtaking, and I'm already out of breath. I look down on all of Belfast in wide-eyed wonder. Suddenly, I am a boy again, and the words that come to my mind when my only responsibility was to deliver 48 Belfast telegraphs each night in the darkness come to me again. Class, brilliant, magic, happy days. I love this city. There's a panoramic view across the whole of Northern Ireland and a distant ribbon of Scottish coastline. A glance at my phone reminds me of the time, and a notification flashes across the screen warning me that I need to be sitting in a chair in a TV studio in Belfast city centre in less than an hour. A glimpse of the Isle of Man brings back memories of my first plane journey to a holiday to Douglas in 1970, when I paddled in the Irish Sea, tempting the waves to reach my shorts as I waded boldly into the icy surf. Beyond the gentle drumlins of Down, the mighty Mournes lurk like bullies, ready to pounce on poor wee Divis. It's almost exactly 30 years since I last stood here. The mountain hasn't changed, but with all of Belfast laid out below me, it's clear by how much this city has expanded. There are aeroplanes flying beneath me, coming in to land at George Best City Airport, and I can see the white stone of Stormont, a building whose proceedings have truly moved me only once, on the day of Geordie's funeral, when the city united in grief. The ferries toing and froing on Belfast Lough now probably carry just as many immigrants from Eastern Europe as emigrants to England in search of a decent living. Some familiar landmarks give me my bearing. The big yellow cranes of Samson and Goliath are a constant, although now a tourist destination for industrial archaeology rather than a working shipyard. The silvery glint of the prow-shaped roof of the Titanic Belfast Museum now competes for attention in East Belfast. Scores of Victorian steeples endure, towering over declining congregations, and the City Hall dome is resplendent in the very centre of the city, like a grand old lady surrounded by impudent adolescent skyscrapers. I can't see whether or not there's a flag flying on the City Hall. In fact, I can see no flags at all from up here. Maybe flags don't really matter in the bigger picture. From up here, the houses are neither orange nor green, and their inhabitants are just tiny ants doing their best to stay alive and feed their young. As I focus on the streets where I grew up, I'm thrilled to spot Woodvale Park, where I played on the swings, and where trees are still carved with the words "Tony loves Sharon true." From up here, the beautiful little park is like a soaked green sod slapped amid the red brick streets. As I follow the landmarks from Shankill to Falls, it's clear that all the military installations have disappeared in the past 30 years, as permanently as the hairs have disappeared from the top of my head. But a deep sadness overwhelms me when I see all too clearly what I already know. The peace walls separating Republican and Loyalist neighbourhoods are still with us. Built as a temporary measure at the outset of the conflict in 1969, they have now outlived the Troubles and persist as a great steel security blanket because of the ingrained mistrust of succeeding generations. There is a glimmer of hope in that the peace walls seem smaller now, dwarfed by the urban spread and the massive city centre developments. But the areas where the peace walls remain are the poorest communities, with the least investment and fewest opportunities for young people. Most people in Northern Ireland don't seem to care if the walls never come down. After all, they don't affect them. But the peace lines are still visible from up here, like painful varicose veins affecting the city's arteries, keeping good people divided and impoverished, and guaranteeing that ethnic bloc voting remains intact. Looking to the north of the city where I lived and worked in the latter part of the 1980s, I trace the Antrim Road from the renovated steeple at Carlisle Circus and notice a crisscross of fences in Clifton Park Avenue and the vacant site of Gertwood Barracks, the controversial former army site that is still being fought over by both sides. I try to spot the little house on the peace line where we lived from 1986 until 1988. Those were the years when I first attempted to put my pacifist principles into action. This was the time I decided to work for reconciliation across peace walls they were still building. When I was 22 years old, we took a radical step. I haven't done many remarkable things in my life, but this was certainly unusual. Some would say crazy. I chose to live on the other side, in enemy territory, and to bring together young people from both sides. For a moment I forget that I'm late. My mind returns to Belfast, 1986. As newlyweds, Lesley and I started out in that wee speck down there, in that tiny red brick house on the peace line. Feelings of fear and excitement return. We were two young Presbyterians in love and choosing to live on the Catholic side of the peace wall to help bring an end to the killing. You really had to watch yourself round there. It could change very fast. But it's an experience that changed my life and a choice I will never regret. I could stand up here for hours just remembering it. Or I could go home and write it all down. Standing on top of Divis Mountain, I resolved to share one of the many untold stories of the Troubles. The stories of ordinary people that will never make it into the history books. I am going to write about the time when we lived in the little house on the peace line.